Hi, it's Dustin Lanier. Thanks for listening. Please find me on LinkedIn for original public sector operations content every week. And please reach out to me if I and my team of procurement professionals at Civic Initiatives can help you be a public procurement change agent. Hey, everybody. We're going to do a LinkedIn Live conversation with Rob Handfield and Steve Nichols, talking about supply resiliency and public response, picking up topics around ransomware and other related topics based on their experience. So why don't I get you guys to introduce yourself? Rob, why don't you go, and then we'll come to Steve, and then we'll start in with some questions.
Sure. My name is Rob Handfield. I'm a professor of supply chain management at North Carolina State University in the Poole College of Management. I'm also director of a group called the Supply Chain Resource Cooperative, which is a center for thought leadership in the field of supply chains.
And I'm Steve Nichols. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the state of Georgia. I'm with the Georgia Technology Authority. That's the GTA and my little name tag there. And my agency also has the state information security function. So the state CISO is one of my peers here at GTA.
Excellent. A few weeks ago, this rampant connection between supply chain risk and ransomware came up. I was kind of amazed at some of the things that I was listening to as far as the impact on the oil and gas supply, on the food supply. And as soon as I saw that, and I thought we ought to pull something together on it, you two are the folks that I wanted to get in the room. So, Rob, I know that you're involved in a lot of the national conversations, and I'm sure that you're helping in an advisory role on some of the federal understanding of the topic. So if you don't mind, can you give us some context on what's going on with this topic and help us kick off our conversation?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, ransomware occurs when a third-party organization, usually a criminal organization, is able to hack into an organization's information system. And they usually do that through phishing or getting access to passwords or an employee's desktop. Once inside, they can kind of lurk inside for a while and poke around. And once they get the lay of the land, they can figure out how to essentially shut down different parts of an organization's systems. And in doing so, then they will demand a ransom, and they will demand, in the case of Colonial Pipelines, I think it was $4 or $5 million or something. And basically, most of these are a lot of them have been traced to Russia. They're criminal organizations that operate on the dark web. What is becoming apparent is we've, in the news, you've seen the Colonial Pipeline, which shut down our gasoline pipeline on the East Coast. It impacted my area, Raleigh, North Carolina. I didn't have gas for a week, as did none of the people around me. And it also has impacted JBS, a major manufacturer or producer of protein, beef and pork and chicken. And it also impacted their global organization in Australia and Canada as well. And what's becoming apparent is that more and more organizations have been paying this ransomware, have been being hacked and have been paying it and haven't been disclosing it. And they'd rather just pay the money and not make a big deal out of it, not be in the press. But these last two incidents have really kind of brought it to the forefront, and it's impacting supply chains, which is why I guess we're here today.
So, Steve, in your chair, you're helping plan for both how the government at a state level is taking care of itself, and then how that may extend out into its relationship with the private sector. And I know that for several years, cyber, you couldn't put enough money into it. So there's always been some prep on this. So how do you feel that government has been preparing for this kind of situation, and what trends are you seeing related to this?
Well, Dustin, I would say that supply chain security has been a topic of discussion for a couple of years now, but it was mainly focused, I think, on acquisition of hardware and software. So suppliers like Huawei or ZTE or Kaspersky were the kinds of situations that everyone was talking about. So like NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, that put out the sort of the 800-53 framework. They have a whole supplement on supply chain security they came out with in 2016, NIST 800-161. So it's not a new thing. I think what's new is sort of this confluence of ransomware events with sort of critical suppliers, and realizing that what we had been doing as an industry, I mean, government had been doing, which is typically just looking for attestations out of their vendors saying that they're going to be secure, is not sufficient anymore. So, now the conversation is really dialed up to we're going to need more third-party audits. We're going to need to have some agreements about notifications when there is an incident.
In terms of prep for ransomware itself, from like a government perspective, has that been on your radar as its own hybrid and as its own blend? Is that something that you feel the states have been preparing for, or is this a new thing that now is demanding a new response?
I guess what I would say is it's been accelerating. So it's not that it's new, it's just that the frequency of the incidents are dialing up. And what we've seen, so I mentioned that my colleague David Allen, the state CISO here, has the enterprise security group. So they've responded to assist with some ransomware events with state agencies and some local governments like counties and municipalities. And if I'm, I won't get into kind of the specifics of the who, what, when, but one of the trends we've seen is a lot of IT shops where they assume because they've got backups that they'll be fine and they'll just be able to recover from backups, and they discover that maybe they have an air gap to their backups, or meaning put it on a separate network, or they're using default passwords or something, and so the ransomware hackers will come in and blow away the backups as well, and then they're really between a rock and a hard place. So that kind of stuff, like really making sure that the backups are viable and separated from the operational environment, would be things where we've really put a lot of focus on that in the last 2 years.
A couple of weeks ago, the FBI director made a fairly bold comparison of saying that this was at a similar level of gravity to 9/11 in terms of demand for a response. I'm curious what your reaction to that is.
Well, I think where people are really starting to worry is they're starting to think about public infrastructure right now, and if you think about it, public infrastructure is something we all rely on and take for granted. We take for granted the fact that power generation and transmission lines, et cetera, are always going to be there. Unfortunately, these same type of public utilities and infrastructure are often the ones that do not have a strong IT infrastructure in place. They just haven't had the investment. They've had in many cases, a small IT staff. And they're vulnerable, and they may not have all of the protocols in place that will go through and provide that level of security. That's where I think the FBI is concerned, is if we start to see the West Coast shut down, or a major power utility in the Midwest shut down, or as we saw a gas pipeline. If you don't have gasoline available, the economy grinds to a halt. So there's major risks, to the U.S. economy if we get these hacks into these critical parts of infrastructure that the supply chain relies on. And software runs a lot of these systems. They absolutely are reliant on these different kinds of systems. So I think that's where the concern is. It's a national security threat at some point.
So, Steve, do the states have responsibility to take leadership outside of the walls of state government? I mean, we have locals, of course, who may potentially be exposed in some of these ways, and then things that are quasi-governmental, like utilities, which Rob said, and other aspects of private sector that may touch. So what are your thoughts on where leadership can come at a state level and how that flows down on having a coordinated response on these kind of topics?
Absolutely, state government does have some of those responsibilities outside its own walls. I mean, these are regulated industries we're talking about. So I mean, the Colonial Pipeline, that's a company that's actually based here in Georgia. So I don't know if this is irony or not, but one of the bills that came through the state legislature this spring, House Bill 156, is about mandatory security incident reporting. And I mean, it applies to a variety of entities like local governments, but it also applies to power and gas utilities. So Colonial Pipeline literally would be subject to that House bill. And then before we went live, Rob and I were chatting a little bit. There's also some federal activity in this area. There's a draft Senate bill that was introduced by Senators Warner, Rubio, and Collins. I shouldn't say introduced. It doesn't have a number yet. It's a draft that's sort of floating around for discussion called the Cyber Incident Notification Act of 2021. So this bill would make that kind of notification that, like we just passed here in Georgia at the state level, happen at the federal level, so it apply to everybody. So anyway, the net is, certainly requiring people to notify, as opposed to what Rob talked about of just, quietly paying the ransom and hoping that they've got the situation under control.
So Rob, what coordination is needed on these kind of things? One of the interesting characteristics of COVID was that it was an emergency that was simultaneously impacting every level of government, including places that weren't used to dealing with emergency. So even though Florida may know how to respond to a COVID situation, that doesn't mean that a county in Iowa knows how to have the same level of response. So not trying to equate those two, but certainly there's some characteristic that this is the type of activity that doesn't have a bias towards big agencies or small agencies or states or private or public. It's where somebody can get a foothold. So it does have some broad characteristics. So what kind of coordination do you feel is necessary for this, and how do we start to build that?
Well, I'm not a cybersecurity expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I can tell you there's some basic practices I think that people can start to look at. The first is the single biggest vulnerability in most organizations relative to cybersecurity is employees. So really, having security awareness training is absolutely essential. And that's something that can be done. A lot of organizations will have some level of security training. They generally don't do a great job. They're often fairly technical, or they may or may not have a quiz at the end of them. They're done maybe once a year. This should be something that becomes a regular type of activity. And I spoke with the chief security officer for a large financial institution, and they make it a regular part of the ongoing activity. And they actually will focus on phishing trends. And again, phishing is the greatest vulnerability, where you get an email, say it's from Microsoft, or, oh, this is from your IT department, and you click on this link and it allows access to your desktop and allows people to get on. Well, what they'll do is security departments will actually send out fake phishing emails, and they'll test to see if people will click on these links, right? And if you get at this organization, if an employee clicked on a link 3 times, their name was published on a list that was sent to the CEO, and they got a letter from the CEO. If a person clicked on this link 9 times, they were fired, right? I mean, they were just gone, because that individual is a security risk. And again, that's really where people need to start, is I think really start thinking about the awareness perspective of we are in a position where we have to be very careful with our desktops and who we're communicating with on email.
Steve, why don't you pick that up and keep going? I mean, what kind of protocols do you think represent a best practice in terms of being prepared, and how do you try to educate internal employees on their responsibilities, and what is the role of our private sector partners as you work on strategies to try to continue to beef up and reinforce this area?
Well, so just kind of riffing a little more on what Rob was talking about with security awareness training. I mean, the playbook for the bad guys changes, literally every quarter, every year, but certainly email and employees is the main door that ransomware is getting through, and so the playbook for the bad guys right now is send some phishing emails, get access to the network, get in, and then somehow elevate to like an administrative account, so that you can then turn loose, across the internal network software that'll encrypt everything, and then you send your ransom note. So that kind of trying to secure that front door to make employees aware is pretty important. Here in Georgia, we've been doing security awareness training across agencies for a long time, but we've consolidated it so everyone's getting the same training, centrally about 2 years ago. So we got 85,000 employees that are getting drugged through sort of continuous, either monthly or quarterly modules, where we set minimums for every agency. And then we're also doing the simulated phishing that Rob talked about. So I think most employees are probably getting at least 6 of those a year, so we can check up on them. But that's just one thing you can do. I mean, I can tell you that, like, the employees in my agency, where we've been doing this since 2012, so 9 years, they can only get so good, right? There's always someone who's distracted. They just took some cold medicine, they're on their phone for whatever reason, they click the link, and they'll come up to me in the hallway and, like, Steve, I clicked the link and I didn't mean to, here's my excuse. It's not the same people every time. So one of the other things we're doing to really try to tighten up our email security is now rolling out mandatory multi-factor authentication for email statewide. So we started that last year. We already had probably in the neighborhood of about 10,000 to 12,000 employees that had multi-factor, but they'd been sort of selected based on access to, more sensitive information. So now it's just everyone with an email account is going to have to do multi-factor authentication going forward.
So let's go in a slightly different direction on supply chain and IT, and I'll come to Rob first. I know that there was some discussion coming out of the Biden administration about shortages of critical categories, which included everything from PPE. But then I know that certain aspects of the rare metals and the chips was the thing. My son's getting ready to go to college, and we talked about building some computers for him. He's like, "Oh, Dad, everything is so expensive, you can't even get anything anymore," right? So what do you see more generally in IT and in some of this computer chip situation and some of the general supply chain situation? I know that the Biden administration came out with some pretty specific requirement or comments about things they were going to do on supply chain nationally. So if you're aware of some of those topics, maybe you could pick that up and talk about what we're doing overall on the access to IT from a supply chain perspective these days.
I've been following the Biden administration's statements on the semiconductor chip industry specifically. The administration, I think, mentioned that they're dedicating certain millions of dollars to creating a domestic semiconductor industry that would ostensibly try to reduce our dependence on Asia for semiconductors. I think this is kind of it's a nice bill, but it's a nice really idea, but it's not very realistic. 90% of the world's semiconductors come from Asia, and about 50% of those come from the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company in Taiwan. So, Taiwan and Hong Kong and China are the hub of the semiconductor industry. And although there's been some discussion, I think, on the part of Intel and TSMC to maybe build a fab here, the fact is, it's an entire supply chain. You can't move an entire, raw material supply chain over to the U.S. right away, and you're still going to be dependent on these upstream suppliers. We're doing a study right now that's looking at TSMC, and they have over 2,500 tier one suppliers that are all located in Taiwan. You can't just move an entire industry over here and say you're going to start it from scratch. So it's a bit of kind of pie in the sky. I don't think it's very realistic to be able to do that. There are some potential ideas around creating, what they call these microfabs, where you have these fabs that will produce customized components overseas, and perhaps they could package them or assemble them here, for specific kinds of modules. That's something that I heard mentioned at a National Academies meeting a couple of weeks ago. So there could be some reasonable alternatives to try to create that. But again, this is not going to happen overnight. This can take years to materialize, if at all.
Steve, at the state level, I know that you have 100 things to work on. Do you see or feel any impact on the supply chain in terms of the kind of things that you need to be purchasing?
We absolutely have the same supply impacts that the private sector has. We're buying from the same vendors. They're coming out of the same factories. So when there's a chip shortage and it's hard to get laptops for whatever reason, that impacts us as well. So the main tool in the toolbox for us is just doing business with top tier suppliers and trying to have a good relationship so that they can move us to the front of the line or near the front of the line when there's a constriction in the supply chain.
How does a state compete for resources that can do this kind of work? And do you make decisions on what stuff that you keep internal versus where you use vendor partners because it's a better mix? People who can actually do this work and be effective at it, what have you seen in terms of the ability to staff it versus how you work with vendor partners?
This is sort of the staffing and skill issue has been a problem for a long time, Dustin. So we've had a series of convenience contracts for security vendors. And so it really started out more focused on doing assessments like, is this new system ready to go live, or come in and help this agency develop their security program. And then what it's sort of evolved to over time is more on incident response. So like coming in and doing the forensics when you have an event to figure out if any data got exfiltrated to help an agency recover. So as that contract has been rebid, we've started to add requirements around response times and that kind of thing, so that we can also tap those same suppliers, not just for the 9 to 5 Monday through Friday kind of security engagement, that's more of a planning engagement into, hey, we have an event, can you put someone on an airplane to be with us tomorrow morning to start doing forensics.
So Rob, if you're teaching people who are interested in a supply chain direction, do they need to be cross-trained in any of these kind of current events? We can't have supply chain be everything. People have to focus. So how do people need to learn about these things that impact supply chain as they come up? And how do you incorporate these kind of situations into the way that you teach and the way that you try to keep the instructional design current in your program?
Well, no, that's a great question. And for the last 20 years, what we've done, in both our MBA and undergraduate program in supply chain, is we actually drop the students directly into these types of projects that we call them through our group, the Supply Chain Resource Cooperative. And we form student teams of 3 or 4 people. And then our partner companies that include companies like Duke Energy, Advanced Auto Parts, Caterpillar, MetLife, John Deere, Biogen, Merck, others. They come to us directly with their problems. So they come to us with, an issue or a challenge that they're facing. And it could be anything in procurement. It could be a market analysis. It could be, understanding best practices in a certain area. So, this is a great experience for students because they are dropped into an industry they know nothing about, into an issue or problem they know nothing about, and rapidly have to become very agile and pick up on what's going on in this area, read about it, and then be able to report on a weekly basis over 15 weeks and develop a set of recommendations to the client organization. So this is a 3-credit class. It's a project class that every student takes at NC State. And we find it's the best way of getting students to directly experience what's going on, what's relevant, and how to catch up with these different issues. And they're exposed right away to NDAs, to confidentiality, to data security issues. Those are really all part and parcel of working on a project team with a partner company in this environment.
So Steve, if your group was affected by ransomware or somebody that you were advising, what would be some of the things they should do early on if that kind of situation comes up? Have you given thought into how somebody should react in those situations? Have you guys put out any guidance, or have you been working on any guidance in that related to that?
We have a little bit of guidance, but I mean, mainly you need to communicate and ask for help. I mean, I mentioned that we've responded to like a number of incidents, and one of the other patterns we've seen are internal IT shops that they think that they've cleared the problem, like, they reimage some PCs or reimage a server, and they don't realize that maybe the bad guys have been inside for a couple weeks or a couple months, or, they start trying to pull their backups and realize they can't get back to like a clean backup. So the net is we've had a couple of incidents where, we're aware something's going on with an organization. They tell us like, thanks, we're good, we don't need any help. And then they call us back a week later like, okay, this is like much worse than we thought. So I don't think that you can, I guess treat it too lightly until you really know everything about what happened.
Yeah, just to comment on that, Steve, one organization that was, massively hit was Merck, the pharmaceutical manufacturer. And they had a case of ransomware that literally shut down all of their operations, all of their planning systems, all of their customer order fulfillment systems. So they were operating their supply chain on pen and paper for a good 3 or 4 months. And this was a real wake-up call to them. And they said, wow, we cannot ever be this exposed again. And they invested in a cyber fusion center, which our team of faculty visited back in February of 2020 before COVID hit. And it's an incredible facility. And they have dedicated people that are, targeted around teams, around the NIST framework, around identify, respond, et cetera. And one area that they highlighted, which is a big area of interest for them, is supplier cybersecurity. Because so many suppliers are connected to organizations today, not just through email, but through, online systems and sharing inventory and VMI and everything else. We have to really make sure our tier 1 and in some cases tier 2 suppliers have these security protocols in place. And I think that's an area where many organizations maybe are not doing everything they need to be doing to ensure that level of security within the supply base. And we have tens of thousands of suppliers. So is it all suppliers, or do we just segment the most important ones? Those are some of the research questions we're looking at right now.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Rob. And when we were kind of at the top of the call, Dustin, talking a little bit about like vendor attestations, one of the things that like we ask for routinely from our suppliers, if they're kind of doing something large for us, is there's an industry standard, for people that are like in the IT services industry, like an industry standard called SSAE 18. So we would ask for an SSAE 18 SOC report, which would be a third-party audit where you get, an audit firm to come in and actually assess all your security controls. So, and this has really become very popular as more things have moved to the cloud. If you're operating like in a cloud data center, you can't let every customer have audit rights and come in and try to audit. So this has really sort of replaced the old SAS 70 audit standard to just have a way that you can just have a trusted third party come in and at least say, here's what they're doing. Here's what they say they're doing as far as security. And we checked it, we looked for evidence and they're actually doing it. And so Those aren't going to be anything you're going to find like floating around on the web. You normally have to sign an NDA to get them. They always show up as like a PDF that's going to have like a 7-day or 30-day limit or something before it locks itself. So they're pretty sensitive documents, but that's one mechanism we use routinely to try to figure out if our partners, really have a robust security program or not.
Let me get you to give some final thoughts against our topic today and kind of where you see things going. Is this going to continue to be front page news?
So, I think, despite all of the regulations and the bills that have been passed and so forth, fact is, I think we are still a security risk, and there are people, and unfortunately, a lot of them are in China, Russia, those kinds of countries that, that's all they do all day. They sit at a computer and try to hack into organizations all day and get into their network and try to shut them down. And it's been a pretty profitable gig for a lot of them for a while. They've been very successful, and I think what we see in the press is really only the tip of the iceberg. I think there's been a lot more of this. A security expert once said to me, it's not a question of if you've been hacked. It's a question of when you'll find out. Pretty much everybody has been hacked, I think, at some point, has had their personal information. You regularly get emails and notifications about it. So on a personal basis, I think people really have to monitor their credit, monitor their security. If you individually are hacked, it's a real pain. It can take years to get out of that and get your credit restored. It's awful. So, for organizations and for individuals, I'd say you just need to be really aware. You just need to be really careful of what's going on out there and be suspicious, unfortunately, is the way that we now have to be.
And Steve, obviously, as you said, you guys have been planning and working on this for a while. So individuals do, of course, need to have that spidey sense of maybe I shouldn't click this, or maybe I should look at the inbound email and see if it makes sense. Obvious kind of things. How can you as a CIO help create infrastructure? What kind of guidance would you have for other CIOs as they're thinking about the kind of things that allows response to this kind of thing and to be able to give you the even edge on being able to manage these situations?
Yeah, I guess I'll maybe just start with a little global or philosophical thing, riffing on what Rob said, which is, we're in an arms race. It's like every year we're spending more and we're getting, kind of smarter and, tightening things down, us being the government. But the bad guys are getting, better as well. And then if you're out there just reading a newspaper, right, or watching CNN, you just occasionally get these situations like Colonial Pipeline that all of a sudden it looks like it's a crisis of like, how did this sneak up on us? But it didn't sneak up on us. It's really just everything's getting more sophisticated. And as we're trying to get economies of scale, moving things into the cloud, into these hyperscale data centers, large software as a service systems, the data breaches are literally getting bigger every year. So it's like when you have a breach, now it's one of these suppliers like a social media company or someone where the breaches are measured in hundreds of millions of records or, even billions instead of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. So that was just sort of my first comment, is it's definitely going to continue to get worse. What I've seen is, we kind of solve it like industry by industry or vertical by vertical. It's like if it gets bad enough in one of the verticals, there will be an effort to regulate. Either the industry will regulate itself, or the government, the feds will come in and do it, and then it'll get a little better. What we don't have is a real global top-down approach. So you still see industries fighting against this. They want to just deal with this internally. So maybe my advice would be, don't wait for your governing body or whatever you roll up to come save you. It's just going to continue to get worse. You've really got to just take this stuff seriously and really invest the the necessary money to get the people and the tools that you need. And it's always annoying for the employees. We're rolling out new things every month or two that make, add a little more friction to the employee's day. And so that's part of it too. It's just people don't like the extra security, but it becomes a necessity to fight that arms race.
Yeah, I think that arms race parallel is interesting. Rob, any last thought against that, and closing comments on the overall impact on our supply chain that we all depend on across the country?
No, I think I agree with Steve. I think it's a great point. It's an arms race. We've gone to two-step verification at our school. It is a pain. When you start getting these, you can't log in and stuff. But I think we have to take these measures and we have to ramp it up. And I would say that the supplier exposure we're really nascent there. We're really in the very early stages of understanding how to secure our supply base. And so I think that's going to be the next big frontier of where we need to take precautions.
So thank you guys for making your time today. Very generous. You guys covered a lot of really interesting topics in there, and I think really hit it well. So thank you guys for your time. Rob, Steve, thank you very much.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Hi, it's Dustin Lanier. Thanks for listening. Please find me on LinkedIn for original public sector operations content every week. And please reach out to me if I and my team of procurement professionals at Civic Initiatives can help you be a public procurement change agent.